And then something happened. The change in Chinese policies have led to the withdrawal of Chinese steel from the market. And you could almost hear a collective sigh of relief. More than that, whilst new markets have been opening for many players, such as Russian exporters, such as Turkish exporters, Iranian exporters, we also have seen iron ore prices rising from impossible $40 per ton, then $60 per ton, and then somewhere towards mid-year even $80 per ton. And then in mid-year we've seen coking coal doubling in price. That certainly has put some more fire into the furnace, whilst China has still been absent from the commercial most traded products markets. So whilst all this was going on, we have witnessed the decision by the United Kingdom to leave the European Union that took place, the referendum that took place in June, I think, if I remember correctly, which has weakened pound somewhat and strengthened euro and dollar. Then we have seen the most wildest of cards, Mr. Trump taking the White House as the next president of the United States of America. So that all seemed to be really supporting the steel market, the raw materials markets. Somehow at the moment we are finding ourselves that all that excitement, all that has been happening, all the upward prices movements have now somewhat flailing and going down. In fact, China is very weak. I've heard this morning that Chinese domestic prices and export prices have come down again this morning. The confidence is, if we're talking numbers, we're talking about $415, $420 per ton FOB, North China for billet, maybe $445, $450 for HRC, so $545, $550 for HRC. And the only commodity which is still pretty much going up is coking coal. That is, of course, based purely on the fact that we are experiencing more and more turbulences in weather, and the cyclone Debbie is what we have to thank for, and all the disruption that she brought to the railway and the actual mining operations. So the picture, as someone who's been looking at these markets for the past 15 years, I've been counting yesterday, the picture is very unclear because we have very confusing fundamentals which are driving the market at the moment, the spot markets at the moment. So I don't really envy the strategists and people who have to think about what are we going to do in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years. So we're going to hear some of these people this morning who will hopefully make it clearer to us how they deal with these turbulences and what is the base they're coming from. And there will also be opportunities for questions. But our first speaker is Mr. John Atherton, who is the Director of International Council on Mining and Metals. So that is an organization which looks at the very, very broader picture. Welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak this morning.
With others to catalyse change for a safe, fair and sustainable mining industry. We do this in a number of ways. Firstly, by developing and promoting best practice in collaboration with members and externals. We generate guidance notes on water management, community development, indigenous peoples interactions. Secondly, one of our key activities is listening and engaging, hence the reason why I'm here today. We look at trends, we systematically monitor trends, we develop relationships with all stakeholders, civil society, governments, in other industry sectors, and we share insights into challenges and opportunities for the industry. Thirdly, we seek to understand and enhance the contribution of the mining and metals industry. We do this by measuring economic and social impacts, assessing their causes, and encouraging multi-stakeholder collaboration in developing ideas that address capacity gaps and enhance the contribution. Finally, we engage in policy at an international or global level with the OECD, with the UNECE, the UN, or the International Maritime Organization as examples. Through these actions, we're seeking to both meet societal expectations of responsible producers of minerals and metals and to manage risks. In so doing, we seek to maintain the social license to operate, which in turn supports us building reputation for ICMM and its members, as well as trust. These are all vital components for sustainability in any industrial sector, but not least in the mining and metals sector. So let's look at some of these risks and societal expectations that industry is facing. The current risk profile that we see from ICMM's perspective can be divided into these 5 broad categories: commodity, operational, market, strategies, and country risks. Some of these are external to the control or influence of the mining and metals sector, for example, many of the country risks, but it's important that society understands that the industry does not preferentially choose to mine in areas of weak governance or risk, but has to go where the material is. Other risks are internal, particularly with respect to health and safety, where ICMM members have taken a leadership position through its aspirational goal of 0 fatalities, supported by its annual publication of safety data. Investors have recently signalled to us that they use the health and safety performance of a company as a measure of its commitment to sustainability. These risks are set against a backdrop of broader societal trends that create further challenge and at the same time reveal opportunities. Increasingly, society is expecting greater social value from the mining and metals industry. We're expected to do good, not only to produce for economic benefit and welfare, but also to generate the benefits through infrastructure, through developing adaptation to post-climate change, for looking at issues or leading on issues with respect to gender equality, inequality, or to worker health and safety. Increasingly, citizens are demanding greater engagement. We're seeing through the internet and through the connectivity that creates more effective citizen activism. We're also seeing its influence on the social license to operate, particularly with respect to local communities and conflict around local mine sites. We're also seeing greater demand from society to participate in decision making. Many of the issues and questions that come to ICMM often arise through the interactions at AGMs from activists or others. And thirdly, society demanding more accountability and transparency. Transparency of production processes, transparency with respect to sources of minerals, transparency with respect to revenues and tax royalties payments. We're saying, as we say, increase the shareholder activism and the increased rights-based discourse. An analysis of professional service firms' perspectives facing the industry highlights these top 10 business risks. The top risk is climate change. Global political inaction at a multilateral level on climate change has not deterred coalitions of investors from sustained action on climate change over the last year. The main thrust of articles on climate change relates to coalitions of investors asking companies to review their exposure to carbon assets. Terms such as unburnable carbon, stranded assets and fossil-free that were unheard of as recently as 2 or 3 years ago have well and truly entered the investor's lexicon. Water is also of very significant concern to investors in the mining industry. Based on the issues that come up in ICMM's engagement with investors and providers of research, the Carbon Disclosure Project, water signatories, are a coalition of investors united by a common interest in enhanced reporting on water-related risks by companies. Between 2010 and 2013, the number of signatories rose from 137 to 530. In parallel, the assets under management by the Carbon Disclosure Project signatories increased from 16 trillion to 57 trillion US dollars in the space of 4 years. So water is an increasing focus of both investor interest and of ICMM's engagement with our member companies and others. When ICMM was formed in 2001, we defined the critical constraints on developing mineral resources as access to land, capital and markets. Recently, water has emerged as a critical constraint on development in many geographies as the marginal cost of water continues to rise. Capital expenditure on water continues to increase in the mining and metals sector. In 2009, capital expenditure on water use was US $3.4 billion. By 2013, this had increased to US $11.9 billion, an increase of 350%. In 2003, ICMM member companies committed not to explore or operate within World Heritage properties, a designation for places on Earth that are of outstanding universal value to humanity by virtue of their natural or cultural importance. In Liberia, a number of mining companies have collaborated with the World Bank on a feasibility study to explore how to accelerate the expansion of protected areas with the support of mining companies. A national biodiversity offset scheme is proposed where mining companies can offset their impacts of biodiversity outside of protected areas through supporting the expansion of the protected areas network. Bulk shipping of metal ores and concentrates between mines and markets where they are refined and smelted is an integral part of our supply chain. Recently, the International Maritime Organization expanded its traditional focus of transport codes on ensuring that the safety of vessels at sea to address the chemical properties and hazards of all cargoes. Different concentrates pose different risks to the environment. In the case of lead concentrates, most are likely to be harmful under the International Maritime Organization's criteria, whereas for copper, it may be less than 4% of the millions of tons shipped annually. ICMM has been engaged in bringing sound science to the International Maritime Organization to ensure or to avoid blanket over-regulation, to ensure that there is no costs or delays at port, or that that there is dramatic increase in costs. We've worked with the IMO to embed the latest hazard assessment concepts for concentrates and enabled the IMO to better distinguish between harmful and non-harmful cargoes. Failure to fully understand and effectively account for community perspectives can also result in significant cost. Late last year, the Financial Times Latin American Confidential Investment Research Service reported that extensive social conflicts, often involving small indigenous communities surrounding issues such as water and land rights, continue to complicate the development of Peru's mining sector. A report issued by Harvard last year looked at the cost of company-community conflict in the extractive sector based on an analysis of 50 cases. It identified loss of value linked to future projects, expansion plans or sales that could go ahead due to conflicts sustained around mine sites. The continuing drive for cost reduction and the need to identify and bring into play new mines is motivating the search for efficiencies in production using innovation. A key example of this is the electrification of mines, which requires significant investment in new battery-powered mobile equipment. This holds great promise in terms of efficient mining processes, as well as reducing emissions of greenhouse gases and diesel particulate matter, which will serve to improve the long-term health and safety of workers. The updated Mining Contribution Index, a composite to assess how mining contributes to the economy, tells us that of the 50 countries where mining is most important, all but a small handful are countries that are less developed or, in a few cases, emerging economies. This means that the mining sector has a crucial role in fostering sustainable development where it matters most. Poverty alleviation in the world's poorest countries is inextricably tied to the minerals and metals that underpin modern society. Lastly, I want to end by emphasising that the issues we deal with are not peripheral considerations, that are nice to have and support in times of high commodity prices, but ones that have a direct bearing on operational success at a time when allocation of and access to capital remains very challenging. On that basis, I want to end with a question. To what extent are you factoring these issues into your decision-making process? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Unfortunately, John needs to go and catch his flight. So if anybody has any questions at all, he's agreed kindly to answer just a couple, if anybody has any burning questions to him now. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I apologise. I have to leave to catch a flight to Sochi for the Russian Health and Safety Week, another presentation. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today.
Thank you, John.